Tansy, hello, and good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is that you're sitting down and listening to this podcast. This is Research DEcolonized, brought to you by the British Columbia Network Environment for Indigenous Health Research, and I am your host, Laura. So today I'm sitting down with my colleague and good friend, Marion Erickson, as a part of our Inspiring Indigenous Scholars mini-series. Hello, Marion. I'm so excited you could join us for our podcast finally. Do you want to introduce yourself with as much or as little detail as you'd like, where you're from, what nation you're connected to, where you work, areas of research, whatever you want to tell our listeners?
Sure. Thanks, Laura. Hello, my name is Marion Erickson. I am from Nakaslii, and I am a member of the DEcolonized Nation. I currently work at the Health Arts Research Center under the supervision of Dr. Sarah DeLeo in the Northern Medical Program at UNBC. I also teach DEcolonized language along with my good friend Dr. Bill Poser. I'm a board member to the BC Oral Health Professionals, as well as a Master's of Education student at Thompson Rivers University.
Awesome. Thank you so much. When we first met, this was when I applied at the Health Arts Research Center. And when I started working there, I vividly remember you telling me, and you were just at the start of it, about your research on the topic of traditional DAC midwifery practices. So what got you interested in this topic? Like, how did this become a thing?
Well, I first came to UNBC and I wanted to take a course that would kind of set me up to become a lawyer and fight for lands rights, deal with rights and title issues, mapping and stuff like that. So the Public Administration and Community Development course at program at UNBC was a great option for me. But in my very last semester, I was taking a health geography class with Dr. Neil Hanlon, and there we were required to do an assignment about a health geography problem. And I had no idea what I was going to do my final project on until I was sitting watching this BBC show called Call the Midwife with my mother. And it's this show where a bunch of nuns and midwives from East London serve impoverished community there. And there was a lot of like social issues that were being brought up in the show. And my mom kind of said, I really like this because it really reminds me of my grandma, my granny. She was a midwife. And I was like, what? A midwife? And prior to coming to UNBC, I was working as a traditional knowledge researcher and research assistant for Nakaslii Band. And it was at that moment I realized that there was discussions and talks about DAC midwifery throughout all the research that I had done all those years. And it was as if like there was so many connections in my brain, like, and I realized that there's something so important about the changes to perinatal health in DAC community. And so I went through the library basically, and I found what limited resources we had about DAC midwifery, and I kind of just compiled them. And when I did that, I realized that nobody had ever done that before. And not only that, but a lot of the researchers who talked about DAC midwives, they didn't even write down their names. They didn't discuss too much about their practice. I think there was a lot of like outsider researchers who, like in the DAC culture, they wouldn't really talk to women because it's not within our culture to just like one-on-one talk to a researcher. So they were mostly, these like old anthropologists were mostly just talking to other men. So there wasn't a lot of information on that. And I realized in terms of rural health, how that has impacted even my own birth experience with my son. So that was what I wrote about. And it just started this long journey where I've met people along the way, including really amazing OBGYNs and leaders in perinatal health care who've kind of guided me a lot in providing advocacy on this issue and bringing voice to some of the challenges rural communities have when it comes to perinatal health. So I found I abandoned my goal of becoming a lawyer and fighting for land rights, and I've since moved into staying on my path as a researcher. And I just really enjoy the environment at UNBC for healthcare research. I have a lot of colleagues who really encourage this work and recognize that there's now a movement within Indigenous communities to revitalize their own perinatal practice, and that this would require a lot of research. So I'm pretty happy continuing this research path.
Great, thank you. I also want to just point out, I also took health geography with Neil Hanlon, so just a little shout out to Dr. Hanlon there for a great course, change in perspectives and lives. But on the topic of geography and let's say health geography, one thing that geographers talk about is the landscape. So how do you find that wellness and landscape connect when it comes to perinatal health in northern BC specifically?
So in rural BC, a lot of times people who require certain types of health care have to leave their communities to receive that care. That often happens with perinatal health care. In most rural communities, there is no perinatal birthing places. For example, Fort St. James Hospital will move patients either to Vanderhoof or Prince George to give birth. And in other First Nations communities, they will sometimes send people out for birth. They'll send them out up to a month, and this can often have very challenging impacts on wellness. For example, my own experience was I lived in Nakasley when I was pregnant with my first child, and I had to leave the community to give birth. And it was really challenging because we had to stay in a motel, and the food that I was getting back home at my mom's house, I lived kind of like right across the street from both my mother-in-law at the time, and I lived at my mom's house. So I always had like really healthy meals. They always cooked for me, made sure I was eating, and things like that. And if I didn't like what was at one mom's house, I could go to the other mom's house. So it was really a really supportive environment to be pregnant. But once I got to Prince George, where I was awaiting birth, I was in a rundown motel that was within feet of a liquor store that had a really unfortunate homeless population in the back, and that was something that I was really, and it's in a urban environment that I hadn't really been familiar with. Like I grew up in the city, but I wasn't too familiar with Prince George, so it was really challenging. And I think about that when I think about people from other communities who are not like me at all and haven't grown up in the city at all, how awful that experience was. So I just recognized that the final few weeks of my pregnancy were actually quite awful is in terms of wellness. But once I was able to get out of there basically and get home, there's a lot of support. You know, my friends, my family, everybody comes to visit the baby, and they all kind of come along and bring as much baby clothes as possible. And if ever I needed anything, if I didn't have something, like at one point I just kind of ran out of money. I had no money, and I needed baby Tylenol, and you know, there's somebody right there. I'm like, hey, does anybody have baby Tylenol? They're like, yeah, we'll bring it over, I'll be right there. So it's a really supportive environment back home. But that's definitely not the case when facing like a birth evacuation and having to access health care for any reason outside of your home community is definitely can be very lonely. So yeah, that's kind of one of the challenges I think the North has, and that's something that I think can be some of these things can change. So bringing DACF midwives back into practice could definitely change perinatal healthcare experiences. And my research has demonstrated that, and other research that I've cited has demonstrated that the provision of perinatal health care that is closer to home has lasting benefits.
I have a follow-up question, but first I want to point out, when I first came up to the North and you talked to me about birth evacuations, this was a really surprising concept, because where I am right now to back in the interior, I'm 5 minutes away from a hospital. And then there's 30 minutes away, like a mini hospital. And then 30 minutes from that, another full hospital. So I think for a lot of people who don't come from like rural or remote areas, just even this idea of a birth evacuation is such a foreign thing. And then coming up north and hearing about this, it was really shocking. And when you shared that story with me originally, just the situation you were in when you're weeks about to give birth, it's really quite alarming. And I'm wondering, so you talked about like the experience as a pregnant woman who had to basically do like a birth evacuation, stay in this place. When you were giving birth, did you have a doula or midwife with you at the time?
That's actually an interesting story. I had planned to have a doula attend my birth. However, she was getting her training through, I think it was Doula International. But she ended up having a medical incident and was not able to attend my birth. But my mom has been basically a doula for a lot of women in our families. She's usually the one that a lot of my cousins have called to say like, hey, I'm giving birth, come come with me. So she was basically my doula. And I think there's a lot of people who are like that in our Indigenous communities, but they don't actually call themselves a doula. But they do exactly do that work.
That's awesome. Yeah, I just asked because I wonder too, and I learned about this while also working alongside you and a few other of our colleagues who were looking at perinatal care. Did you find that having your mom there was a cultural buffer in a sense? Because you're very, I don't know if people know this, but like you have a ton of traditional and cultural knowledge. So how was that experience?
Well, with my mom, it was kind of like a normal, we have you have your mom. I think there wasn't really any culture in the birth of my first son, and it was just because of where we were. Like, we weren't in community. If we were in, if it was more like when the hospital was opened in Fort St. James, there would have been a lot more community present, elders and stuff like that. I know a lot of my family came to visit, which is great. We have a lot of privilege in our family, being that many of us have vehicles, many of us have the time and stuff like that. But when you're in community, I think that more elders would have showed up if I had given birth in Fort St. James, in Nakazi, in my traditional territory.
Awesome. Thank you for being willing to share that with us. So not switching gears, but I'd say progressing into this conversation. So you chose a Master's of Education. You're just finishing that up if you haven't already finished it since we last spoke. What made you choose a Master's of Education? And what have you done up to this point? What are your findings that you're able to share or want to share?
Right now I'm in the Master's of Education program at Thompson Rivers University. One of the main draws to Thompson Rivers University was that their Master's of Education program is online. This allows me to stay in my traditional territory, and I find that is so important. Being able to stay in my traditional territory has been very helpful. And then the coursework being online just provides me the flexibility, being a mom with 2 children. It gives me the flexibility to do things when I have the time, and, you know, not having to attend a classroom and drive to a campus, I think really allowed me to focus a lot on the course content and material. At this point, I am doing my master's thesis under the supervision of Dr. Rod McCormick, and I have done the data collection and synthesized the data. One of the reasons why I chose Masters of Education is because I want to create a DACA doula training program for my community that's by my community. So one of the things that I found when I was looking at doula education and birth worker education is that a lot of what's available is what I would call helicopter training initiatives. We see this with research, where the researcher goes in, they extract all this data, they write a report, and they bring it away from the community, and there's a lot of criticisms with that. It still happens a lot, and that's what I find with some training initiatives as well. So if we had, say, for example, Doula Canada or Dona International come in, it would be an outside trainer who comes in and trains people in mainly either a Western, sometimes overly American way of knowing, and teaches a lot of the mainly Western and physical aspects of birth work. And then they leave. They take all the money with them. The economy that could have been created by the community is taken with them, and it leaves the community. So what we need is to really honor the United Nations Declarations for Rights of Indigenous People and take our education back. So my goal is to create our own doula training curriculum, and that's what I did in my Master's of Education. Was we created our own doula curriculum framework that will inform a doula training program, and the study areas and things like that, I think, was in DACF territory in some of our smaller communities first. So the findings for that was the history of the problem section of the research has been informing healthcare students and practitioners. I've developed a course called DACF Midwifery Past and Present, and this just basically explains the trajectory of perinatal healthcare from exclusively the hands of DACF women into the hands of Western medicine. And that, I think, has been very helpful for a lot of people to understand, well, why aren't any of my colleagues Indigenous? Like, why is it mostly my patients? Those kind of reflective questions are provided. As well as the curriculum framework, I have major concerns that those who are not Indigenous will incorporate these traditional teachings into their practice. So I'm not going to share too much of that, but mainly just to say that there is a lot of work that needs to be done with regards to Indigenous people and relationship with healthcare providers and social workers. It's a major concern, the amount of racism that my people have been facing within the healthcare system. And these stories are passed down through oral tradition, and so they still live within the community, and it's a major healthcare concern, and it's a burden to accessing healthcare.
So I have a follow-up question with that. It makes total sense to not have some of those specifics released, right? Because it's probably not that applicable to other nations, right? When you have published everything, your thesis, is there going to be a framework recommendation that other nations could follow to do the same type of thing? What are you envisioning with that?
So I used a method called community-based participatory action research. So one of the implications of the research is that it can be duplicated within other nations. And I've already had some discussion from other nations who want to implement their own and do this method as well. So it does have implications for other nations, and I think it's actually a really great way to actually get this done quite quickly, because I know developing any curriculum takes a lot of time and a lot of demand on the community, but using this participatory action framework actually utilizes the governance structure within the community to bring about systemic change. And that's the beauty of the methodology that I chose.
That's really exciting to hear, Marion. And now you're looking to complete a PhD, really taking your research to that next level. Do you want to talk a little bit about what made you want to jump into a PhD, knowing how rigorous of a program that is? And if you have an idea of what that research is going to look like right now, I don't know if you can talk about that yet.
Well, I haven't received an acceptance letter yet. As somebody who wants to continue doing research for a living, doing a PhD will allow me to continue my research. And a lot of Indigenous students have access to the PSSP funding. That was something that funded my master's thesis research. If the nation was going to do this doula curriculum development with just funding, it would take a lot of resources, scarce resources from the community. So I was able to use a lot of the funding that I had available to me, as well as scholarships and bursaries, to complete my master's. And I think that's kind of what I'm after with the PhD, is that I can continue to work for the community in a way that also allows me to complete the research that I like doing and that I find so important.
I love that, because when you talked a little bit earlier about how traditionally research, I should say traditionally with Western researchers coming into communities, it's quite extractive, right? So it's really refreshing to hear someone who's like, oh, I want to use this research to do work for the community in partnership with my community, versus just like, I'm going to do this research and write a paper and advance my career. So it's so refreshing to hear that. I absolutely love it. And as an Indigenous woman who's working and doing her school, right, in academia, do you feel supported within this work? And if yes, how? And if no, can you describe any of the obstacles you've faced in this line of work and this profession?
That's kind of a mixed bag answer for me. For one, I started my master's program during the pandemic, so I was able to achieve a really high GPA because of the fact that I had no distractions. There was really nothing else to do during the pandemic except stay home, so I thought might as well research. But that was also a challenge because we had a lot of people within DECF territory who died from the pandemic. So I think there was 1 month where there was 3 people who died in a very short period of time. They were all family, so it was really awful. And I had a professor who provided me with a 3-day extension for my final paper, which I thought was kind of gross. Like, 3 people, 3 days. Great, thanks. After that, I, of course, asked that professor for a letter of recommendation, and he said, I really thought she was going to fail, but she pulled through, and that was his great letter of support, which actually got me a scholarship. But I think that kind of mentality within academia is so prevalent. There isn't a lot of time for people to be given the space they need for things like grief and loss. It's kind of like show business, the show must go on. He still has to finish grading my paper and moving on. So that was a real challenge for me. I thought that was kind of an awful way of being in the academy, because my people were called DACFs, but a lot of people call us carrier because we do take really good care of our loved ones who pass. We have a lot of traditions and things like that. We really do take really good care of our loved ones and their family when they pass away. So it's actually really a huge culture divide for me. And then there's the PSSP program that my band administers. That's been also a mixed bag. So my band's current policy uses colonial words to describe students. So for me, being a student who passes my classes, I'm considered a good asset. And a student who doesn't pass all their classes is considered a liability. So they also use a lot of words that are very similar to what people use in corrections. So probation and those kind of words to describe students, I think, is kind of really awful to think about. And it just kind of solidifies the fact that, you know, you're a ward of the state. Just like it says on your status card, you're definitely a ward of His Majesty the King. So that I've had a lot of troubles with, I've had conflicts with, that I've had to spend a lot of time trying to resolve. But on the other hand, they have supported me financially once I did get through those hoops. But I'm actually really lucky that I am a really strong advocate. I grew up with a lot of strong advocates, so I do advocate for myself. But really, I know a lot of students who have had issues accessing their band funding because of the way that the PSSP program is administered by their band. So there's a lot of people who talk about conflicts with their bands, and it's a huge problem, especially when people from reserve communities don't really understand what you're doing. I've had to sit and kind of explain what a master's thesis is, and that it does count as being a student full-time, even though I'm just taking one course, because our policy states we have to take a certain amount of courses. So it's just been a bit frustrating, but also it's been kind of a learning journey for the community as well as myself, and just being a good advocate for myself. So now I have the privilege of being the one who a lot of my community members come to when they're having challenges with the post-secondary school support program. So I feel really good about that. I like helping my people. I have the privilege of being the one who a lot of my community members come to when they're having challenges with the post-secondary school support program. So I feel really good about that. I like helping my people. As far as supportive environments, I know that my thesis committee has been so supportive in this research. I have Dr. Roderick McCormick, Dr. Lisa Bearskin, and Dr. Gloria Ramirez from TRU on my committee. And having them on my committee really has been so wonderful. They really help guide me to implementing this methodology in a way that works for my community, and they've been extraordinarily helpful with developing my writing and advancing my research. So that has been really great. The other thing that I have been really supported in is with my job here at the Health Arts Research Center, having an employer who understands and accommodates my educational goals has been instrumental to my success. It's also really helped within the office as well, because one of the really great things about doing the Master's of Education program is a lot of times they're preparing you to be a principal, which means they're preparing you to deal with conflict, and that has kind of, I think, helped within our office, but also within what we teach, which is cultural humility and anti-Indigenous racism in healthcare. I've been able to really hone my skills in teaching and been able to really look at how we can best apply the TRC calls to action number 23 and 24. I've also been very well supported by other scholarship programs. So, of course, BC NEAR has been the greatest part of my research. Irvin K. Barber, the National Indian Brotherhood, the New Relationship Trust, and Inspire have all been really great supporters of my research. The reality is that I will be leaving school with some debt, though, because the post-secondary school support program can't support all of my financial needs, and the scholarships and bursaries I use to pay off my old student debt, but the provincial and federal student loan program that offers that gives me a few opportunities for grants. So when I apply for student loans, I get some of the money as a loan and some of the money as a grant, and then some of it gets forgiven once I graduate. So that has been really great. I think one of the bigger issues that I've had is in terms of support has been also my emotional well-being, and I think it's important to let students know that when you are doing post-secondary school, when you're doing a degree or something, you are engaging in rapid skill acquisition. So in those times, it is important to have emotional support. So I do access counseling services when required. So I think that's been really instrumental to guiding this research, because a lot of times for me, in my research area, I run into some pretty heavy topics in my research. Some of it racism perpetuated directly at my people that has created the stereotypes that I grew up with as a young person in the community. So that can be really challenging. So I think it's important to kind of have that emotional support, whether it's through the university itself, through that counseling service, or through just going through regular as a status Indian, I can access counseling services with my benefits under FNHA. So that has been so helpful throughout my research journey and continues to be helpful to this day.
Thank you for all of that. I want to comment on two things. So to those out there listening, and I don't know if you've had a chance, Marion, last podcast episode, we sat down with the amazing Harley Eagle, and he talked about similar things, right? Like self-care in that aspect. Because academia can be hard, and there's going to be triggering things. There's going to be challenges. And so I think it's so important to tell students, anyone who's considering going into health and wellness research, anyone who's already in it but wants to keep going, to take that time and like check in with yourself and make sure you're good to go before you do anything. The other thing I wanted to say is I'm so glad you explained that in terms of funding, because I think out there's a lot of misconceptions, right? People are just like, oh, you're Native, you get free schooling. Like, no, there are some hoops you have to jump through, and there are obstacles, but you've shown you can do it, and it's amazing that you have that strength to advocate for yourself and are now mentoring members of your community with that, because there are lots of funding opportunities out there. We do have some listed on our website, our B Senior website. We have a document we've made that contain a lot of these scholarships and funding opportunities available to Indigenous students in undergrad and graduate studies who are wanting to pursue a career in academia. So be sure to check them out if you are listening and financing your education is something you're concerned about. So Marion, you've given a lot of great advice, I think, for anyone listening, Indigenous students, current scholars, non-Indigenous allies, or people wanting to learn more about Indigenous health and wellness research. But for us, BC Near as an organization that really strives to try and support scholars like yourself who are doing such important work, what are some ways that you think we, so BC Near or organizations like us, can actually do to support your projects and passions and the projects and passions of students like yourself?
One of the things that I sometimes see with organizations that are meant to fund, say, for example, scholarships and bursaries or research, is that they kind of duplicate activities that are already done within universities. So, for example, nutrition and exercise, that is something that UNBC students here can access with their student ID and just go to the gym, the Northern Sports Center, and exercise. So there's a lot of times where I see people trying to enhance students' experience while they're students, when really a better opportunity is to just give us money. I would rather not see somebody who's doing a exercise video. You know, if I want to go and watch an exercise video, I'm going to go and I'm going to YouTube it. If you're really good, I'm going to follow your channel and I'll exercise and follow you along from home. But, you know, I think that there is kind of issues with some organizations losing their vision, which is to give Indigenous people a chance in academia, which is feed us, and give us money, because that's really our biggest need. It's a day-to-day challenge. A lot of us don't have generational wealth. We don't have family who can pay our tuition and help us pay our living expenses throughout our entire academic journey, and we are surrounded by a lot of people who have that privilege. So they get to spend a lot more time studying and don't really have to take up a part-time job, while a lot of us Indigenous students, we don't have that privilege of generational wealth. The other thing is in terms of who gets funded. So of course we have a huge issue with pretendians in academia, and so that can be an extraordinary challenge. So I think it's important to recognize when somebody's just doing kind of their own little passion project versus somebody who's actually working for the benefit of their community, whether it's in health or language revitalization and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think for me, my thesis is an action-orientated research endeavor. It addresses community needs. I don't have the privilege of being able to study something that purely addresses my own needs and passions. I know that my people, many of them, live in poverty as a result of the Indian Act. I know there are not many of us who have lived experience living in community and intend to bring it home. So a lot of people, they just move away. Like, they move away from the community and they go and get their education, and they are not bringing the knowledge back to their people, which is really unfortunate. Many people just move away, or they've grown up away and they're not working for their people. So I think it's important to support those who are doing community work, who are bringing the knowledge home. And I realize that, there's some people who might be very triggered by me saying this, because due to whatever intergenerational issues they have, they're not going home, they're not working for their people. But what I mean to say is that, if true Indigenous research is grounded within Indigenous ways of knowing, and you are not going to get those Indigenous ways of knowing if you are not even familiar with your culture whatsoever. So that, I think, is really important, because there's so many Indigenous people who come from diverse ways of knowing, and they don't really want to leave our communities, and so supporting community orientated research should support those who are still in our traditional territories. So
thank you so much for sharing your perspectives on that. They're really powerful. So thank you. And being cognizant of the amount of time you have shared with me, and we've gone through the educational run here, is there anything that you wanted to share about your work or some of the experiences you've had on your journey that maybe we haven't touched on yet?
At this point, I have been talking a lot about my educational journey, and so I just want to acknowledge my thesis supervisor, Dr. Roderick McCormick, and committee members Lisa Bearskin and Gloria Ramirez, as well as the communities that I have worked with on my research, Yekuche and their wonderful contact, Krista Jensen, as well as Teresa Morris of Binche KO, as well as my various sponsors throughout my master's degree program that I mentioned earlier. Of course, my wonderful supervisor, Dr. Sarah DeLeo, who has provided me the time to be able to do a lot of research on perinatal health care in Northern BC.
Great. Thank you, Marion. And yes, a little shout out to the Health Arts Research Center. That is where my career started under the amazing Dr. Sarah DeLeo. You can check out their phenomenal work at healtharts.ca. And thank you so much for your time, Marion. It's been great to have you. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you, listeners. This has been Research DEcolonized. If you have any questions for Marion or to me about what happened or what we've talked about today, feel free to send me an email at lauramcnabcoombs@uvic.ca. Thanks so much. Bye.